23-year-old Emily Parker adjusted her brand-new ID badge for the 100th time as she walked through the massive doors of Station Kepler 186. Her hands were shaking slightly and she knew it. This was the biggest moment of her life and she was trying really hard not to mess it up. The station floated in deep space, right at the edge of what everyone called the neutral zone. It was a place where all the different alien species could meet without anyone claiming it belonged to them. And today, Emily was about to join the most exclusive club in the entire galaxy, the Galactic Archaeological Council. She was the youngest human to ever get this honor. Most of the other members were at least 100 years old, and that was just counting the species that aged like humans did. Some of the aliens in the council were so old they remembered when Earth first made contact with the rest of the galaxy. The main exhibition hall was enormous. Emily's footsteps echoed on the polished floor as she entered. The ceiling stretched up so high she couldn't see the top, and floating platforms held artifacts from civilizations that had died out millions of years ago. But she wasn't here to look at any of those. She was here for the armor. It hung in the center of the room, suspended inside a shimmering energy field that made the air around it blur and ripple. The armor was black as midnight, but when the light hit it just right, you could see patterns swirling across its surface like oil on water. It looked almost alive. Emily had seen pictures of it before, of course. Everyone had. The armor was famous across the entire galaxy. But seeing it in person was different. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Well. Another human come to stare at things they'll never understand. Emily turned to see Ambassador Roth, a Krell diplomat with 4 eyes and skin that looked like blue leather. He was smiling but not in a nice way. Behind him, a group of other council members had gathered, all watching her with expressions that ranged from curiosity to barely hidden contempt. "I'm not here to stare," Emily said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm here to study." "Study?" A female Talith archaeologist clicked her mandibles together in what Emily had learned was their version of laughter. "Child, beings far smarter than you have studied that armor for 2,000 years. Do you know what they've learned? Nothing. Absolutely nothing." Emily bit her tongue. She wanted to tell them they were wrong, that they'd been looking at it all wrong this whole time. But her grandmother had warned her about this. "Let them underestimate you," she'd said. "It'll make things easier later." Ambassador Roth circled around her like a predator sizing up prey. The armor belonged to the predecessors. The species that built half the megastructures in this galaxy before they vanished 3 million years ago. Every race has tried to claim it. Every warrior has tried to wear it. Every scientist has tried to unlock its secrets. And every single one of them failed, added a Theran security chief, his scales rattling with amusement. The last person who tried to force their way past the containment field spent 6 months in medical care. The armor burned out their entire nervous system. They had to relearn how to breathe. Emily walked closer to the display, ignoring the whispers behind her. The other council members were placing bets now, she realized. Betting on whether she'd try to touch it, whether she'd embarrass herself, whether she'd run away crying. Let them bet. Her grandmother had been right about the patterns. Emily could see them clearly now, etched into every surface of the armor. They weren't just decorations. They were instructions. A language that everyone else had been trying to translate for centuries, never realizing that translation wasn't the point. Recognition was. "You know what I think?" Ambassador Roth's voice dripped with false kindness. "I think humans have this adorable little habit of believing they're special. You found some old ruins on your planet, you made contact with the wider galaxy, and suddenly you think you're the chosen ones or something." Several aliens laughed at that. Emily's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. Instead, she pulled out her personal tablet and started taking notes, documenting the armor from every angle she could see. The measurements, the energy signatures, the way the containment field pulsed in a rhythm that nobody else seemed to notice. "Ignore her," someone muttered. "Let the child have her moment. She'll realize soon enough that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved." But Emily wasn't listening anymore. She was counting. The pulses in the containment field came in sets of 7, with a longer pause every 49 beats. 7 times 7. It was the same pattern her grandmother had shown her in the old family journals, the ones that dated back almost 300 generations. The journals that everyone else said were just myths and fairy tales. Emily stepped closer to the containment field. The energy barrier hummed with power, warning her to stay back. Around the room, conversations stopped. Every eye was on her now. "Dr. Parker," the Theran security chief called out, his hand moving toward his weapon. "I strongly advise you to maintain a safe distance from the artifact." Emily barely heard him. Her hand was reaching out, almost on its own. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind, "When you see it, you'll know. The armor will know too. Just trust your blood." Her fingertips touched the energy barrier. Everyone expected an explosion. Everyone expected her to be thrown backward, screaming in pain as electricity fried her nervous system. Instead, the barrier parted like a curtain. The entire room went dead silent. The containment field, which had held firm against every attempt to breach it for 2,000 years, simply opened up for her. The alarm systems that should have been screaming stayed quiet. The security drones that should have been converging on her position just hovered in place, confused. And the armor began to glow. It started as a soft amber light, barely visible at first. But it grew brighter with each passing second, pulsing in that same 7-beat rhythm Emily had been counting. The patterns on its surface started to move, flowing like liquid across the black metal. Ambassador Roth's 4 eyes went wide with shock. That's impossible. The armor moved. Not violently but deliberately. Piece by piece, it began to disassemble itself in midair. Gauntlets, chest plates, leg guards, all of them floating free from their gravitational locks and drifting toward Emily like leaves caught in a gentle wind. Someone shouted for security. Someone else was frantically recording everything on their device. A few of the Alien Council members were backing toward the exits. Emily stood perfectly still as the first piece, a gauntlet, settled onto her right hand. It wasn't cold like metal should be. It was warm, almost alive, adjusting itself to fit her perfectly. Then came the other gauntlet, then the arm guards, then the chest plate. Stop her. Ambassador Roth was shouting now. Someone stop her before. Before what? Emily wanted to ask. But she couldn't speak. Her mind was flooding with information, with memories that weren't hers but somehow felt familiar. She saw stars being born and dying. She saw civilizations rising and falling. She saw Earth 3 million years ago when it looked nothing like it did now. And she saw the faces of the predecessors. The faces of her ancestors. The last piece, the helmet, sealed itself into place. Emily's vision changed, overlaying the physical world with data streams and energy patterns she'd never been able to see before. She could see the fear in the aliens around her, could read their elevated heart rates and stress hormones. But most importantly, she could see the truth they'd all been blind to for so long. "You wanted to know if I was worthy," Emily said, her voice echoing strangely through the armor systems. She turned to face the shocked council members. Wrong question. She reached up and deactivated the helmet, letting it dematerialize so they could see her face. The question was never about being worthy. The question was whether I'd recognize my own family's work. Ambassador Roth's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Emily smiled. "You called them the predecessors. We always just called them Grandma and Grandpa." The silence in the exhibition hall lasted maybe 3 seconds before all hell broke loose. Ambassador Roth was screaming into his communication device, demanding that every available security unit converge on the main hall immediately. The Talith archaeologist had knocked over a display case in her scramble to get away from Emily, sending ancient pottery crashing to the floor. Half the council members were trying to get out the doors while the other half were recording everything on their devices, probably already sending footage to their homeworlds. Emily just stood there, feeling the armor respond to her thoughts like it was an extension of her own body. When she thought about taking a step forward, the leg servos engaged before she even moved. When she wondered about the defensive capabilities, a holographic display appeared in her peripheral vision showing weapons systems that shouldn't even be theoretically possible. It was overwhelming and completely natural at the same time, like remembering how to ride a bike after years of not doing it. The Theron security chief, a battle-hardened veteran named Krax, was the first to actually do something instead of just panicking. He raised his plasma rifle, the weapon charging up with a high-pitched whine that made everyone freeze. "Step away from the artifact, human," Krax ordered, his voice steady despite the fact that his secondary hands were shaking. "Power down whatever systems you've activated and step away. Now." Emily looked at him, really looked at him, and the armor sensors gave her more information than she wanted. She could see his elevated heart rate, the way his pupils were dilated with fear, the microtremors in his trigger finger. The armor was already calculating threat responses, showing her 17 different ways she could disarm him before he even finished pulling the trigger. "I'm not a threat," Emily said, keeping her hands visible and non-threatening. "I know this looks crazy, but if everyone could just calm down for a second." "Calm down?" Ambassador Roth had apparently found his voice again. "You just breached a containment field that's held for 2,000 years. That armor has killed or permanently injured everyone who's tried to interface with it, And you're wearing it like it's a casual outfit. Because it recognizes me, Emily tried to explain, but her words were drowned out by more shouting. A Krell military advisor was demanding that the entire station go into lockdown. A Nexian diplomat was already drafting a formal complaint to the Galactic Council about humans tampering with protected artifacts. Someone was threatening to sue the station management for inadequate security measures. Emily closed her eyes and took a deep breath. This was not how she'd imagined this going. In her head, there had been a lot more scientific discussion and a lot less panic and death threats. If I could just explain, she started, but cracks cut her off. Explain later. Power down now or I will fire. Emily felt the armor's defensive systems activate automatically, responding to the threat. Energy shields flickered into existence around her, and the weapon systems that had been passively monitoring suddenly locked onto every armed individual in the room. That made things worse. Now everyone was screaming and running for the exits. 3 more security officers had arrived and taken up positions around the room, all with their weapons trained on Emily. The station's AI was announcing a level 4 security breach in that calm, corporate voice that somehow made everything feel more terrifying. Wait, stop. Emily shouted, and to her surprise, her voice was amplified by the armor, echoing through the entire hall loud enough to cut through the chaos. Everyone froze, which was good, but now they were all staring at her like she was about to explode, which was less good. I'm going to power down, Emily said slowly, keeping her voice calm. See? I'm doing it right now. No sudden moves. She thought about deactivating the armor, and it responded instantly. The energy shields dropped first, then the weapon systems went offline. The helmet dematerialized into nothing, then the chest plate, then the arm and leg guards. Within seconds, the entire suit had vanished, leaving Emily standing there in her regular clothes, hands raised to show she was unarmed. The armor was gone, but she could still feel it somehow, like it was hovering just outside of normal space, ready to return the moment she needed it. Ambassador Roth stepped forward cautiously, like he was approaching a wild animal. Where did it go? What did you do with it? I didn't do anything, Emily said. It's just stored, I think. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure how it works. I just know it does. Stored where? Demanded one of the scientists, an elderly Velix professor who looked like he was about to have a heart attack. That armor has mass. Physical presence. You can't just make it disappear. Emily shrugged helplessly. I don't know what to tell you. It's there when I need it and not there when I don't. Maybe it's in subspace? Or maybe it's being stored as compressed data. The information kind of downloaded into my head when I put it on, but I'm still sorting through it all. That admission caused another wave of frantic conversations. Emily caught fragments of what people were saying. Words like contamination, and brainwashing, and neural takeover kept coming up. They thought the armor had infected her somehow, turned her into something dangerous. She needed to make them understand, but how could she explain something she barely understood herself? Look, Emily said, trying a different approach. I know my family history sounds like mythology to most people. The stories my grandmother told me about the predecessors, about how they were connected to Earth, everyone always dismissed them as fairy tales. But what if they weren't? Are you seriously suggesting, Ambassador Roth said slowly, his 4 eyes narrowing, that humans are descended from the predecessors? The most advanced civilization the galaxy has ever known. Yes, Emily said simply. That's exactly what I'm suggesting. The laughter started small but grew quickly. Within seconds, half the room was laughing at her. Not polite, dismissive laughter either, but the kind of genuine, belly-deep laughter that comes from hearing something absolutely ridiculous. The predecessors built Dyson spheres, someone shouted between laughs. They manipulated gravity like it was clay. They created technology we still can't understand after millions of years of study. And humans, the Talith archaeologist added, clicking her mandibles in amusement, still use chemical rockets to get into orbit. Your homeworld didn't even achieve faster-than-light travel on your own. You reverse-engineered it from crashed alien ships. Emily felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment, but she stood her ground. Yeah, we did reverse-engineer FTL technology. Know what? Because we were starting from scratch. Because 3 million years ago, the predecessors decided to reset themselves. They stripped away all their technology, modified their own genetics, and seated themselves on a protected world to see if they could build it all back up again through their own effort. The laughter died down a bit. Now people were looking at her with pity instead of amusement, like she was a delusional child who actually believed in Santa Claus. Emily, Ambassador Roth said, his voice taking on a condescending gentleness that was somehow worse than anger. We've done genetic scans of humans. Thousands of them. You share no significant genetic markers with predecessor DNA samples we've recovered. Because you don't know what markers to look for, Emily countered. The modifications were designed to be hidden, to only activate once we'd reached a certain level of cultural and technological development. That's what the armor just did. It didn't just recognize me as human. It recognized that humans are finally ready. Ready for what? Krax asked, his weapon still raised but his expression more curious now than hostile. Emily met his eyes. Ready to remember who we really are. Ready to reclaim what our ancestors left behind. Ready to teach the rest of the galaxy what they forgot while they were busy scavenging technology instead of building it. The exhibition hall went quiet again, but this time it was different. This wasn't the silence of shock or fear. This was the silence of people actually considering what she was saying, weighing it against everything they thought they knew. Ambassador Roth broke the silence. Prove it. Emily smiled. Give me access to the predecessor facility on Kepler 7 and I will. 3 days later, Emily found herself sitting in the most uncomfortable chair she'd ever experienced, surrounded by what felt like every important alien in the galaxy. The Emergency Council chamber on Station Kepler 186 had been designed to accommodate 40 different species, which meant the furniture was a weird compromise that satisfied nobody. Her back was killing her, but she wasn't about to complain. Not when Ambassador Roth was glaring at her with all 4 eyes like he was trying to set her on fire with his mind. The chamber was packed. Word had spread fast about what happened in the exhibition hall, and now representatives from species Emily had never even heard of were crowding in to see the human girl who claimed to be descended from the predecessors. Some looked curious. Most looked angry. A few looked genuinely terrified. Chancellor Draxus of the Grand Assembly finally called the room to order. He was a Vexil, which meant he looked like someone had crossed a lizard with a business executive. His scales were doing this color-shifting thing that Emily's crash course in alien body language told her meant he was stressed beyond belief. Dr. Parker, Draxus began, his voice amplified through the chamber's speaker system. You've made some extraordinary claims. Claims that, frankly, most of this council finds difficult to believe. I understand that, Emily said, trying to keep her voice steady. She'd barely slept in 3 days, surviving on station coffee that tasted like motor oil and anxiety. I know how it sounds. Do you? Ambassador Roth leaned forward. Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like a young human with delusions of grandeur has stumbled onto something she doesn't understand and is now weaving fairy tales to explain it. Emily bit back the angry response that wanted to come out. Instead, she pulled up her personal tablet and projected a holographic display into the center of the room. 3 days ago, I requested access to my family's historical records. Records that go back 300 generations. Most academic institutions dismissed them as mythology, but my family kept them anyway. The hologram showed a genetic sequence, the double helix rotating slowly in the air. To most of the aliens in the room it probably looked like gibberish. But Emily watched as several of the xenobiologists leaned forward, their expressions changing from skepticism to confusion to something like shock. Dr. Maxis, the Talith anthropologist who'd laughed at her in the exhibition hall, was now making a choking sound. That can't be right. That's a predecessor-based sequence. We've seen it in their biological research facilities. But it's integrated into human DNA, Emily finished for him. Specifically, in sections that your previous scans labeled as junk DNA because you didn't know what you were looking at. A Krell scientist named Vesh stood up so fast she knocked over her chair. We've scanned thousands of humans. We never found any connection to predecessor genetics. Because it's not active in most humans, Emily explained. It's dormant. Hidden. My family carries a more complete version because we were chosen as keepers. Guardians of the knowledge until the rest of humanity was ready to remember. This is insane, muttered someone in the back row. Emily pulled up another display, this one showing historical records from her family's archives. My ancestor, Daniel Parker, wrote this in the year 2089 Old Earth calendar. He documented strange dreams he'd been having. Dreams of cities that floated in space. Dreams of technology that could bend reality itself. He thought he was going crazy. She scrolled through more entries. His daughter, Rebecca, had similar experiences. So did her son. So did his granddaughter. For 300 generations, my family has been having these dreams, these fragments of memory that everyone told them weren't real. They kept journals anyway. Drew pictures. Made calculations. And you know what they drew. Emily pulled up a sketch from 1847, drawn by a woman named Grace Parker who'd lived in a small farming town and never traveled more than 50 miles from her birthplace. The sketch showed a structure that made several aliens in the room gasp. "That's the predecessor facility on Titan IX," Dr. Maxey's whispered. "Down to the exact architectural details. But that facility wasn't discovered until 2247. 100 years after this drawing was made." "Grace Parker never saw that facility," Emily said quietly. "She remembered it. Just like I remember things I've never personally experienced. Just like every human carries these memories buried deep in their genetic code, waiting to be unlocked." Chancellor Draxus had gone completely still, his scales frozen in a pattern that Emily couldn't read. "You're saying the predecessors didn't vanish? They deliberately regressed themselves?" "Yes," Emily nodded. "The galaxy was stagnating. Every major species had reached a technological plateau. They were living off the scraps of predecessor technology, studying it, reverse engineering it, but not truly understanding it. Not creating anything new. They'd become dependent." She stood up, the movement making several security officers tense. "So the predecessors made a choice. They decided to reset. They modified their own genetics to remove all their technological knowledge, all their advantages. They seated themselves on Earth, a planet in a quiet corner of the galaxy, and they waited." "Waited for what?" asked Ambassador Roth, and for the first time since Emily had met him, he didn't sound angry. He sounded genuinely curious. "Waited to see if they could do it again," Emily said. "Build a civilization from nothing. Go from stone tools to space flight through their own innovation, their own failures, their own hard-won understanding. No shortcuts. No inherited technology they didn't truly comprehend." A murmur ran through the chamber. Emily could see the implications clicking into place for some of them. Earth was isolated, she continued, protected by automated systems that kept other species away. For 3 million years humans evolved, struggled, fought, failed, and learned. We discovered fire. We invented the wheel. We figured out agriculture, mathematics, physics, chemistry. Every single step forward was earned through effort and understanding. "We nearly destroyed ourselves a dozen times," Emily admitted. "Wars, environmental collapse, nuclear weapons. But we survived. And every time we failed we learned from it. We built better. We thought deeper." She pulled up one final image. Earth, seen from space, blue and beautiful and fragile. 50 years ago humans finally achieved faster-than-light travel. Not by discovering it on our own, yeah, we found crashed ships and reverse-engineered the technology. But the fact that we could reverse-engineer it at all? That we could look at technology millions of years more advanced than ours and figure out how it worked? That was the trigger. "The genetic failsafes activated," Dr. Maxey said slowly, understanding dawning in his compound eyes. "The Heritage Protocol." Emily nodded. "Exactly. The predecessor facilities across the galaxy have been dormant for 3 million years, waiting for humans to reach a certain level of development. Waiting for someone with the right genetic markers to come along and wake them up." She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of as many delegates as she could. "I'm not special because I'm better than anyone else. I'm special because my family happened to carry a more complete version of the genetic code. But every human has some of it. Every human carries the potential to interface with predecessor technology. Which means," Ambassador Roth said slowly, his 4 eyes widening as he worked through the implications, "that humanity has just inherited control of every predecessor facility in known space." "Not control," Emily corrected quickly. "Access. There's a big difference. The facilities aren't weapons or tools to be controlled. They're schools. Libraries. Teaching systems designed to help species develop, not to give them power they haven't earned." Chancellor Draxus finally spoke again, his voice heavy with the weight of history shifting beneath their feet. "If what you're saying is true, Dr. Parker, then everything we know about galactic history is wrong. The balance of power, the territorial agreements, the entire structure of our civilization has been built on assumptions that just collapsed." "I know," Emily said softly. "And I'm sorry. I know this is scary and confusing and probably feels unfair. But my ancestors didn't do this to hurt anyone. They did it because they loved this galaxy. They wanted it to grow, to thrive, to become something more than a bunch of species squabbling over ancient technology they didn't understand." She took a deep breath. "They wanted to give everyone a teacher. And now, finally, after 3 million years, that's exactly what I'm here to do." The silence that followed was profound. Emily could hear her own heartbeat, could hear the quiet hum of the station's life support systems, could hear what sounded like someone crying in the back of the room. Then Ambassador Roth did something Emily never expected. He stood up and bowed, a deep formal bow that his species reserved for royalty. Then teach us, he said simply. The engineering bay of Station Kepler 186 had never been this crowded. Emily stood in the center of what felt like controlled chaos, watching as scientists from 40 different species tried to set up their recording equipment without bumping into each other. Some were floating near the ceiling using anti-gravity harnesses. Others had brought their own atmosphere bubbles because they couldn't breathe the station's standard air mix. One group had even brought what looked like a food cart, apparently planning to make this a long observation session. In front of her, suspended in its own containment field, was the reason they were all here. The fragment, as everyone called it. A chunk of a Dyson sphere that had been discovered 800 years ago and had baffled every scientist who'd studied it since. Emily had seen the reports. The fragment was about the size of a car, made of a material that shouldn't exist according to conventional physics. It generated more energy than it consumed, which violated thermodynamics. It seemed to create power out of literally nothing, which violated everything anyone understood about how the universe worked. Thousands of papers had been written about it. Hundreds of theories proposed. Zero answers found. Emily's hands were sweating. She'd convinced the council to let her try this, but now that she was actually here, doubt was creeping in. What if she was wrong? What if the armor recognized her but she still couldn't actually do anything useful with predecessor technology? What if she was about to embarrass herself in front of the galaxy's greatest scientific minds? Dr. Parker? Dr. Maxey's approached her carefully, like he was worried she might bolt. Are you ready to begin? Emily nodded, not trusting her voice. She closed her eyes and thought about the armor. It was there instantly, materializing around her body like it had been waiting just beneath her skin. The familiar rush of information flooded her mind, but this time she was ready for it. This time she could sort through it, find what she needed. The fragment lit up. Not with regular light, but with something deeper. The patterns on its surface, which had always looked random to human and alien eyes alike, suddenly made perfect sense to Emily. They were moving, flowing, rearranging themselves like a combination lock clicking into place. Impossible, breathed someone in the crowd. The fragment has been completely inert for 8 centuries. We've tried everything to activate it. Emily walked closer to the containment field. That's because you were trying to turn it on. You were treating it like a machine, something you could control with the right inputs. She placed her armored hand on the field and like before, it parted for her. But it's not a machine. Not really. She reached out and touched the fragment. The moment her fingers made contact, her mind exploded with understanding. It wasn't painful, just overwhelming, like trying to drink from a fire hose. She could see how the fragment worked, see the elegant mathematics that made it function, see the philosophy behind its creation. The predecessors didn't break the laws of physics, Emily said, her voice distant as she processed what she was learning. They just understood something about reality that the rest of us missed. Consciousness and matter aren't separate things. They're two sides of the same coin. She could feel the fragment responding to her, ancient systems coming online after millions of years of sleep. Energy began to build, crackling across its surface in patterns that looked almost like circuitry but moved like living things. What are you doing? Ambassador Roth called out, and Emily could hear the fear in his voice. Dr. Parker, what's happening? I'm asking it nicely, Emily said, and she couldn't help but smile at how absurd that sounded. But it was true. The fragment wasn't a tool you commanded. It was more like a partner you negotiated with. The energy output jumped dramatically. Every sensor in the room started screaming alerts. Scientists were shouting numbers at each other, readings that didn't make sense, power levels that should have been impossible. She's generating a zero-point energy cascade, someone yelled. That's not possible without a quantum singularity. There is no singularity, another scientist argued. The readings don't show any spatial distortion at all. Emily let them argue. She was too busy having a conversation with a piece of technology that was older than most stars. The fragment wasn't generating energy in the traditional sense. It was doing something much stranger. It was negotiating with the universe itself, making a deal. It's borrowing power, Emily said out loud, trying to translate what she was understanding into words others could grasp. The fragment negotiates with reality for a temporary loan of energy. It promises to pay it back eventually, when the universe reaches heat death and needs all the energy it can get. It's like taking out a loan from a bank that won't come to collect for trillions of years. The room went silent except for the humming of the fragment and the beeping of sensors. That's... Dr. Maxey started, then stopped. Started again. That's insane. Reality doesn't work like that. You can't negotiate with the universe. It's not a conscious entity. Isn't it? Emily asked, finally pulling her hand away from the fragment. It continued to glow, happily generating impossible amounts of power now that it had been properly activated. The predecessors figured out that consciousness exists at the quantum level. Every particle in the universe is making choices, following probabilities. The fragment just knows how to ask those particles politely to choose the outcomes it needs. She deactivated her armor and turned to face the assembled scientists. Most of them looked like their brains were melting. A few looked angry, like she'd personally insulted them. But a precious few looked excited. Those were the ones who got it. For 800 years, you've been trying to command this thing, Emily continued. Trying to force it to give up its secrets. But the predecessors didn't build technology that responded to force. They built technology that responded to understanding, to cooperation, to partnership. A Krell engineer named Tesh raised one of her 4 arms. But why? Why make technology that's so difficult to use? Why not just build straightforward machines that do what they're told? Because, Emily said, technology that only works when you truly understand it can't be weaponized by accident. Can't be abused by people who only want power. The fragment will generate unlimited energy for someone who approaches it with genuine curiosity and respect. But it'll stay dormant forever for someone who just wants to exploit it. She walked over to the fragment and gently powered it down. The glow faded, the energy output dropped to 0, and it became just an inert chunk of impossible material again. The predecessors built ethics into their technology. Not as rules that could be broken, but as fundamental requirements for operation. You have to become a certain kind of being before their tools will work for you. Ambassador Roth looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. And humans? You're saying humans are that kind of being? Some of us are, Emily admitted. Not all. The armor won't work for every human, just like the fragment won't activate for everyone. The genetic markers are necessary, but they're not sufficient. You also need the right mindset. The right approach to knowledge and power. She looked around at all the faces staring at her. My ancestors spent 3 million years learning how to be worthy of this technology. They failed repeatedly. They built civilizations that collapsed. They created weapons that nearly destroyed them. They made every mistake you can possibly make. But they learned from those mistakes. They grew. They changed. And now you want to share this knowledge, Draxus said slowly. Despite the fact that it gives humanity an enormous strategic advantage. Strategic advantage? Emily laughed, though there wasn't much humor in it. Chancellor, my ancestors gave up godlike power because they realized that hoarding knowledge was killing the galaxy. They watched other species stagnate, watched them waste centuries studying technology instead of understanding principles. Why would I repeat their mistake? She pulled up a holographic display showing predecessor sites scattered across known space. There are 300 facilities like this one. Libraries, workshops, teaching centers. All of them just woke up when I activated the armor. All of them are ready to share what they know. With everyone? Asked Tesh, and there was something like hope in her voice. With everyone who's willing to learn, Emily corrected. But you have to actually learn. You can't just download the information or steal the technology. The facilities will teach you the principles, show you the mathematics, guide you through the philosophy. But you have to do the work yourself. You have to earn the understanding. She looked directly at Ambassador Roth. Some species will progress quickly. Others will take centuries. But everyone who approaches this with genuine curiosity instead of greed will eventually get there. And if someone tries to take it by force? Roth asked quietly. Emily's expression hardened. Then they'll discover why the predecessors installed defensive protocols. These facilities aren't just schools. They're also tests. Violence triggers lockdowns that can last for generations. Try to steal from them and they'll shut down completely. Try to weaponize what they teach you, and they'll revoke your access permanently. She let that sink in for a moment. The universe rewards cooperation and punishes exploitation. That's not me being idealistic. That's literally how predecessor technology is programmed to function. The silence stretched out. Emily could see the calculations happening behind everyone's eyes. The political implications. The social upheaval. The complete restructuring of galactic civilization that her revelation was going to cause. Finally, Dr. Maxey spoke up. When can we start? 6 months had passed since Emily activated the fragment, and the galaxy had transformed in ways nobody could have predicted. Emily stood in the observation deck of the neutral moon Theria Prime, watching transport ships arrive from every corner of known space. Each one carried delegates, scientists, students, all coming for the same reason. They wanted to learn. The Galactic Council had called an emergency session, but this time the atmosphere was different. No more anger or fear. Now there was something else in the air. Something that felt almost like hope, though Emily was cautious about naming it that. Hope could be dangerous when you were trying to fundamentally change how an entire galaxy thought about technology and power. Her grandmother stood beside her, looking out at the same view. Margaret Parker was 78 years old, with silver hair and hands that still bore the calluses from decades of archival work that most academics had dismissed as a waste of time. Now those same academics were begging her for access to the family records. "You nervous?" Margaret asked, not taking her eyes off the arriving ships. "Terrified," Emily admitted. "What if this all goes wrong? What if giving everyone access to this technology destroys everything instead of helping?" Margaret squeezed her granddaughter's shoulder. "Your ancestors asked themselves the same question 3 million years ago. They didn't have any guarantees either. They just had faith that beings, given the chance to grow instead of stagnate, would choose to become better." "That's a lot of faith," Emily muttered. "It is," Margaret agreed. "But they weren't naive about it. They built safeguards, installed checks and balances. The technology itself is the filter. Only those who approach it the right way get to use it." A chime sounded, indicating it was time for the council session to begin. Emily took a deep breath and headed toward the main chamber, her grandmother walking beside her. They'd be presenting together today, showing the council the progress that had been made in the last 6 months. The chamber was packed even fuller than last time. New species had joined, ones who'd heard about the Heritage Initiative and wanted to be part of it. Emily spotted Ambassador Roth in his usual seat, but he gave her a small nod of acknowledgement instead of the hostile glare she'd gotten used to. Progress, she supposed. Chancellor Draxus called the session to order, his scales showing a pattern that Emily had learned meant he was cautiously optimistic. "Dr. Parker, Dr. Margaret Parker. The Council is eager to hear your report on the Heritage Initiative's first 6 months." Emily stepped up to the central platform and activated the holographic display. 300 points of light appeared, scattered across a map of the galaxy. "These are the predecessor facilities that came online when I activated the armor. In the last 6 months, we've established learning centers at 47 of them." She zoomed in on one, a massive structure orbiting a red dwarf star. "This facility on Kepler 9 specializes in energy systems. We currently have 63 species represented there, with over 10,000 students enrolled. They're learning everything from basic power generation to advanced fusion containment." "And their progress?" asked Dr. Maxis, who'd become one of the initiative's strongest supporters after getting over his initial skepticism. Margaret stepped forward to answer that one. "Variable as we expected. The Talith contingent has already mastered basic zero-point energy theory. They'll be ready to move to practical applications within a year. The Vexel group is moving slower, but their theoretical understanding is deeper. They're asking questions that even surprise us." "And the species that are struggling?" prompted Ambassador Roth. Emily pulled up another display. "The Krell engineers are having difficulty because they keep trying to brute force solutions instead of understanding the underlying principles. The facilities have locked them out 3 times for attempting to bypass safety protocols. But," Margaret added quickly, "they're learning. Each lockout includes a teaching module that explains why their approach was wrong. The last lockout was shorter than the first, which means they're starting to get it." A Nexian diplomat raised a tentacle. "Dr. Parker, there have been concerns. Some species are progressing much faster than others. Doesn't this create a new form of inequality? The smart get smarter while others fall behind." Emily had been expecting this question. "The facilities don't measure intelligence. They measure approach. The Talith are progressing quickly because they naturally think in cooperative, non-hierarchical ways. Their entire culture is built around shared knowledge. That mindset aligns perfectly with how predecessor technology works." She pulled up comparative data. "Meanwhile, species that have historically been considered more technologically advanced are struggling. Why? Because they're used to top-down control systems. They want to command the technology, dominate it, and predecessor systems simply won't respond to that approach." "So you're saying our entire cultural framework determines our access to this knowledge?" Draxus asked, and Emily couldn't tell if he was offended or intrigued. "Not determines. Influences," Emily clarified. "Any culture can adapt. Any species can learn. But those who've built their civilizations around cooperation instead of competition have an easier time with it." Margaret added, "Think of it like learning a musical instrument. Anyone can learn to play piano, but someone who already understands rhythm and harmony will have an easier time than someone who's tone-deaf. That doesn't mean the tone-deaf person can't learn. It just means they have to work harder to develop that sense. A military advisor from the Theron Collective stood up, his scales rattling with agitation. This is all very philosophical, but let's talk about the practical reality. What happens when one species gains access to weapons technology that others don't have? What's to stop them from using that advantage? Emily had been dreading this question, but she'd prepared for it. Nothing stops them from trying. But here's what happens when they do. She pulled up footage from an incident 2 months ago. A splinter group from the Krell military had attempted to use knowledge gained from the facilities to build an enhanced plasma weapon. The footage showed them activating their prototype and then showed it simply stopping, shutting down mid-fire. The facilities monitor how their knowledge is being used, Emily explained. Not through surveillance but through the technology itself. Predecessor systems are networked at a quantum level. When someone tries to weaponize what they've learned, every piece of technology they've built using that knowledge stops working. The Krell group lost access to everything, Margaret continued. Power systems, medical devices, research equipment. All of it went dark. It took them 3 weeks of genuine reflection and cultural reform before the facilities would even talk to them again. The Theron advisor sat down slowly, processing this information. The predecessors weren't pacifists, Emily said clearly. They knew conflict was part of existence. But they built their technology to discourage weaponization and encourage problem-solving. You can use what you learn to defend yourself, to protect others. But try to use it for conquest or oppression and it turns against you. She looked around the chamber. Some of you are probably thinking this sounds like the technology is controlling us, forcing us to behave a certain way. But it's not control, it's consequence. It's the universe responding to how you choose to use the gifts you've been given. A young Talith student, barely old enough to be at the council session, raised a timid appendage. Dr. Parker, what about mistakes? What if someone uses the technology wrong by accident, not malice? Emily smiled at her. Great question. The facilities understand the difference between intention and mistake. If you're genuinely trying to help but something goes wrong, they'll teach you what went wrong and how to fix it. But if you're deliberately trying to harm others, they shut you out completely. Chancellor Draxus leaned forward. Dr. Parker, I think I speak for many when I ask, where does this end? How advanced can we become? Is there a limit to what the facilities will teach us? Emily and Margaret exchanged glances. This was the big question, the one everyone really wanted answered. There's no arbitrary limit, Emily said slowly. The facilities will teach you everything the predecessors knew. But here's the catch. The more advanced the knowledge, the more developed you need to be to understand it. Not just intellectually but emotionally, socially, culturally. She pulled up a diagram showing different levels of knowledge. Basic power generation? Any species can learn that within a few years. Advanced materials science? Maybe a decade or two. Consciousness interfacing technology? That requires you to fundamentally understand what consciousness is, how minds work, how to respect the autonomy of other beings. Some species might master it in a century. Others might take 1,000 years. And the really advanced stuff? Asked Dr. Maxis quietly. The technology that manipulates reality itself? That, Margaret said, her voice heavy with significance, requires you to be the kind of civilization that would never abuse it. It requires wisdom, not just knowledge. Compassion, not just capability. The predecessors themselves took millions of years to reach that level. They're not going to hand it to species who haven't earned it. Ambassador Roth stood up slowly. Emily tensed, expecting opposition, but instead he did something unexpected. He walked to the center of the chamber and looked up at the human delegation. 6 months ago I mocked you, he said simply. I called you arrogant, delusional. I laughed when you said humans were descended from the predecessors. He paused. I was wrong. And more importantly, I was thinking about all of this wrong. He turned to address the entire council. I've spent the last 6 months at the Kepler 9 facility. Not as an ambassador, just as a student. And you know what I learned? The predecessors didn't abandon us 3 million years ago. They trusted us. They believed that every species in this galaxy had the potential to become what they were. They just needed the right teachers. His voice grew stronger. For thousands of years we've been scavengers. Living off the scraps of a civilization we didn't understand, fighting over ancient technology like dogs over bones. The humans didn't come here to lord their heritage over us. They came here to give us the chance to finally grow up. The chamber was dead silent. Emily felt tears stinging her eyes but refused to let them fall. So I propose, Roth continued, that we stop thinking of this as humanity giving us something. Instead, we should think of it as all of us, finally, starting to become worthy of what the predecessors left behind. The council erupted in discussion, but this time it wasn't angry or fearful. It was excited. Hopeful. Emily watched species that had been rivals for centuries talking to each other, planning joint research projects, discussing how they could help each other learn. Margaret put her arm around Emily's shoulders. You did it, sweetheart. You actually did it. We did it, Emily corrected. 300 generations of our family, keeping the stories alive when everyone said they were myths. The predecessors taking the biggest risk in history. And every species out there choosing to trust instead of fear. She looked out at the chaos of excited conversations. Now comes the hard part. Actually living up to what we've promised. One step at a time, Margaret said wisely. The predecessors didn't build their civilization in a day. Neither will we. As the council session continued, Emily pulled up one final display. It showed Earth, small and blue and beautiful, floating in the darkness of space. For 3 million years, that little planet had been home to a species that didn't know what they really were. A species that had struggled and failed and learned and grown, all while carrying the legacy of gods in their DNA. Now humanity was finally remembering. And more importantly, they were teaching the rest of the galaxy to remember too. Not the technology or the power, but something more fundamental. The understanding that consciousness and compassion mattered more than capability. That wisdom was worth more than weapons. That the greatest technology ever built was the choice to become better than you were. The aliens had laughed at a human girl touching ancient armor, never imagining she'd made it. Not personally, but through the longest inheritance in galactic history. An inheritance she was now sharing with anyone willing to learn. And across the galaxy, in 300 facilities that had slept for 3 million years, the real work was just beginning.